turn out to be too bad of a day today. Surprised by that. Is it good? Yep. Okay.
All right, I'll call this special Public Safety Committee meeting to order. Members of the Public Safety Committee present, Jeff Russell and myself. Not sure where Councilwoman Reinhardt is. I thought she said she would be here, but she had to leave by 4:45.
That's my understanding. I'm not sure if she's made it yet. Just turned 4 o'clock. So.
I also have council members Nelson and James, interim chief Jackson, Captain Forster, and Captain Samuelson. Mayor is present as well, as well as the city clerk. Was there any public comments sent to the committee?
We did not receive anything, no.
The meeting was supposed to have been open to the public, but the governor extended the executive order closing public meetings to the public. So our live streaming the meeting is being recorded. But this is actually the first of our first meeting we're holding for the New York State Police Reform Initiative, as enacted by the governor. So this is really just all the members of the committee have been given a copy of the Police Reform Initiative. Hopefully they have a chance to review that. Just like to note that Councilwoman Reinhardt has a right. Sorry. So the full Public Safety Committee is present. All right. So I'd like to turn this meeting over to Mayor, just to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Sheldon. So to recap, many of you probably received New York State's Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative / Initiative. For the council members, I provided each of them a copy some time ago to give you a good time to read it. It's not too dense, but the state has indicated to us that there is a reform initiative that must occur for each municipality or jurisdiction that has a police force. As part of that, it needs to engage in stakeholders across the community. It needs to engage with elected officials. It needs to engage with the community at large. And it needs to be, to the extent that we can make it, a public process. Many of you probably have seen that the Sheriff, Jim Petrone, has started parts of this process for the county. The city is a participant in that process. So we do and have been working with the county and other municipalities to assist in the countywide police reform initiative. But we as a city have our own unique challenges that we also need to address and make part of our reform initiative. The same thing is occurring in the city of Dunkirk. I just got off the phone today with Mayor Willie Rosas, who is also creating a separate committee to engage in this police reform initiative. For us here in the city of Jamestown, we thought it would be best to engage the Public Safety Committee, since we already have a committee that actively works in this role to help plan, initiate, and follow through with our reform process. We do need to have a completed reform report voted on and approved before April of next year. If we do not, the state has told us, informed us that they will not be providing funding, state assistance, whether that's grant or other aids to the city if we have not undergone this process. So today is meant to be a kickoff and planning meeting for this committee to talk about the process. We have our interim police chief as well as the two captains with us today to talk a bit more about some of the work that they have been seeing and discussing across the state as municipalities start to undergo this. The overall intention is to use this group to help plan what stakeholder groups we want to start talking to. Our intention is to model this after what we do with our HUD funding, our Consolidated Action Plan with HUD. That's to engage smaller groups of stakeholders across the city, across the community, to provide feedback, better understanding, to then create a report which we will then have public hearings on to solicit additional feedback, and then submit that final report to council from this public safety committee. Okay? We want to make sure that we do this in a way that really supports the stakeholder groups and the community as a whole. And so we want to use this time really to help plan on what that's going to look like. I've given you all a bit of a brief agenda, which will include some information from our police department on statistics, a discussion on what the stakeholder groups may look like, and start to outline more of a planning schedule for the reform initiative. So with that, are there any questions? Wonderful. I do want to point out, as Councilmember Sheldon mentioned, initially this meeting was meant to be open to the public. The governor had not signed an additional executive order preventing the public from attending these meetings. That actually was supposed to end October 4th, which is why the meeting was initially allowed to be open to the public. Since the governor has extended that executive order 202.67, that now basically extends his executive order to limit public interaction in order to prevent the spread of the coronavirus up until November. So that is why there was a bit of a change in the meeting location, as well as not being able to release to the public. We are live streaming all of these meetings. They are all available for public comment as well. So with that, I'd like to, with your permission, Councilmember Sheldon, turn it over to the police department for some more information.
Absolutely.
Okay, turn it over.
Okay, so first, does everyone have a copy of this? That is a good brief overview of the executive order. I'm going to pass out the statistics that's related to the governor's order. I think one of the most important and maybe the most difficult things to do now is to start picking stakeholders, community members, businesses. I think that's where we need to kind of focus on from this point out, because they're a pretty important role in this.
So, Andrew, Chief Jackson, could you give us just a brief overview of the executive order and what type of things the governor's executive order is looking for?
The governor's order is basically an evaluation from the community as to certain policies, like use of force, resisting arrest, other statistics like that, special teams, equipment. There's quite a wide range of things that we have to take a look at, that the governor wants us to take a look at and evaluate. And the input is not only by the police department, of course, but also by the community. Community policing is also a big aspect of it as well. And I also emailed the department's policies in relation to the governor's order to everybody. I emailed them yesterday.
Oh, I was gonna say.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
And for the council members and for the members of the public, we'll make that information available on our website so folks can see it in the PowerPoints. Chief, maybe you can go through briefly some of the statistics or highlight some of the statistics for this group about just kind of giving a baseline of where the department is at for some of these charges over the course of several years.
Okay. The first page in the statistics I handed out, the governor wants us to look at how many resisting arrest charges we have, and obviously these are only up to date through August of this year, and it covers the past 5 years. So obstructing governmental administration in the second degree, we have a total of 900 from 2015 through August of 2020. Resisting arrest is 371 for 5 years. And basically what we're looking at is our numbers have actually decreased for obstructing and resisting arrest charges over the past 5 years. There's been a 15.8% decrease in obstructing governmental administration in the second, and a 6.3% decrease in resisting arrest over the past 5 years.
And it looks like you also include some information about the race, gender, and age of the arrestees on the next page.
Yes. 76% of the arrestees are male, 24% are female, 72.1% are white, 26.6% are black, 0.9% American Indian, Alaskan Native, 0.2% not reported, and 0.1% Asian. And the age, the most common age is between the age of 20 and 29, with 449 arrests at the bottom.
Just to back up for a minute, I hate to interrupt, just for the public's sake, and Chief, either yourself or one of the two captains, can you explain to the public what, obviously resisting arrest is pretty explanatory, but can you maybe in layman's terms explain to the public what obstructing governmental administration in the second degree is, and how both of those charges are violations, misdemeanors, or felonies?
Both charges are misdemeanors. Obstructing governmental administration, the second is a misdemeanor, and so is resisting arrest. Resisting arrest is usually a physical act by the suspect to refuse to put his or her hands behind his back, or prevents the officer from making a custodial arrest. Obstructing governmental administration, the person could just obstruct by any means necessary. They don't even have to be under arrest. It could be anyone that may be hiding from a police officer or failing to obey any type of command. That is usually obstructing. That's the most easiest way to describe those.
Could be a friend or a relative of the victim.
Oh, sure.
Person.
Yes. The next page are our use of force incidents by year from January 15th to August 2020. Total of 700 incidents and an increase of 16.1% from 2019 to 2020.
Chief, when did the documenting use of force come into effect for the chief of captains?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Captains, I think it was 5 years ago,
Okay.
at least.
Would that result in the fact that there's only one use of force in 15,
Yes.
16, and then the rest become documented?
Yes.
For clarification, it was documented in 2015 and 16, but it was always put on a standard police report, where in the last several years it's been, there's a separate form now that officers use, a use of force report. I believe a second incident number is taken for that report in addition to the standard police report, and that would explain why to the public that it's only showing 1 in 15 and 16. I don't want this to show the appearance that there's been this dramatic increase of use of force incidents within the police department. It's just a matter of documentation of that on 2 separate forms now.
When you say use of force, what does that What is that? What is that? What is that?
It could mean, hands, kicking, striking, a taser, pepper spray, any type of, physical act like that.
Even the officer withdrawing his pistol or a taser and displaying that has to be reported.
Oh.
And that gets unreported, then when that comes to me, I have to report those to the
So
state.
even if you don't use it, you still have to.
Even the fact that you pull it out and display it, you have to report that.
Okay.
And we
Thank you.
submit that to the state.
Okay.
In 2015, the state mandated us to report all incidents of force. Like Captain said, that would qualify in any of that elements.
Thank you.
Are there any other statistics that you'd like to highlight for us?
The top 5 calls for service, vehicle and traffic, followed by domestic disputes, and then check the well-being. I know it's been brought up about a mental health unit, a mobile mental crisis unit. Check the well-being, that would fall into something like that, and that is in our top 3 calls. Followed by animal complaint and then warrant checks.
I don't know if you have an answer for this, but is there do you kind of have a handle on why you're, I mean, which is a good thing, your resistance arrests have gone down, is there, I mean, is people just complying, or? I know it's hard, you know, so.
I think I can answer that. The advent of different tactics used by the police,
Okay.
as well as the employment of a taser or some of the other things. Most people that we deal with on a lot of occasions, they see that and they don't want to.
Okay.
So
All right.
better tactics lead to better results, kind of thing.
Good, thank you.
I would also add in there that I think the use of body cameras, by officers, on patrol, if individuals know that, that they're being videotaped by the police, they tend to want to comply a little more.
Are there any others that anyone you'd like me to talk about further?
I'm surprised, I mean, not trying to belabor anything, but I was gonna say, the fireworks probably give you close to like a lot of these calls or something, so, since they started in like April, it's
Yeah.
like, that's gotta be like your next row, I think,
Oh, my
you know, 'cause that was pretty rough.
It was rough.
For a while.
Holy moly.
Any other questions on statistics? We will make these available to the public, as well as the Chelsea.
I just had a quick, I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm just wondering, like, what's the likelihood of someone resisting arrest? Like, have you ever looked at, like, okay, given it happens this many times in a year, how many times it happens in a month or in a shift, or, you know, like, when you go out, you know, when an officer goes on duty for that day, is he thinking it could happen today, or it happens so many times a week, or on average, or, you know, I'm not sure if you looked at that, or, you know what I mean? And
Like trying to predict when it.
yeah, or just saying how often
Full moon?
in a typical, or in a,
Yeah, only probably.
Generally, I'd say in the warmer months, but aside from that, I don't think there's any way to predict it.
Any other questions?
Chief, I noticed, as I was cruising through this, that there's several things in here that the police department already does, that the governor wants us to do. being done in this department for a while now. Could you maybe touch on or highlight a couple of those things at all? One obviously would be the use of force report that's done.
Use of force, chemical munitions policy is actually in the governor's plan. We have that. Racial profiling and discriminatory practices, we have a policy on that. Civil disorder, minority recruitment, OC spray, how we investigate hate crimes, taser, there's several more. Like you said, a deadly force policy, how we select people to become police officers, and some administrative things, how we handle discipline.
Now, years ago, the police department used to be accredited. That kind of went by the wayside under the former chief. Is there intentions to, for the Jamestown Police Department to become accredited again?
We are pursuing that. We are looking at the benefits of that.
Could you explain again?
Yeah.
What does that mean to be accredited?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Being accredited means you meet the state standards,
Okay.
and they come in, state comes in and reviews your policies to make sure you're up to their standards.
Well, that has to do with training.
It has to do, it basically covers your entire general orders, your policies. Training is definitely a part of it, but it covers everything you do in the police department.
Policies, procedures.
This might sound like not a comment, but I'm surprised you have a choice. I would think you have to be accredited.
I think there's a cost. Is there a cost of accreditation?
Well, there's a cost because it's such a involved and lengthy process. You have to usually detach an officer, usually a sergeant or a lieutenant or above, for several weeks, so they can't do what they normally do.
Oh.
They are dedicated to meeting the accreditation.
But I would kind of like to agree with, Tom over there, is that, to be accredited, we have to be accredited in teachers and things
Right,
like that,
yeah.
so I just wonder why it's, even though it requires the resources of the police department, which is not your fault, I don't understand why the state doesn't require that municipalities and police departments meet the state standards for policing. I just find that's above our pay grades, but I just find that very odd and a little disconcerting.
Yes.
So that could be part of it, right? So that could be part of the police reform initiative is working towards receiving and maintaining that accreditation, that state accreditation. There are a lot of municipalities that do not have that accreditation. So we're not alone in this process, and in fact, I think there are several departments in this area that also don't have their accreditation. So it's not uncommon, but having something like being able to work towards state or national standards is definitely one thing that could come out of this reform initiative.
And Chief, is there a way that we can have that, kind of like, what the governor is looking for and what the, APD is already doing? Is there something that we should kind of like, we have that?
Don't we have that? Yeah,
I-
he emailed it yesterday.
Oh, okay.
We'll share a link, Councilman.
Never mind.
We like paper copies, so we need to like write on it and circle.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
okay.
actually one of the blue ones you got.
Oh, one of these, okay.
Well, I'm happy to know that you are pursuing that, accreditation. Just knowing that you've met the standards of the state, that goes a long way, to valuing just the work that you do as well as keeping, having your residents feel safe about the police department.
one benefit about the work that we have done as a city, I know many times we don't shine a light on some of the work of our police department, is that many of the items that the governor has indicated as executive order, as was said, are things that we already have policies on and we actively do as a police department. So as a new mayor coming in, I'll tell you one of the first things I asked for was all the police department general orders to see where we're at. So I got a giant binder of all of them delivered to my desk.
Nice bedtime reading.
It is great bedtime reading. I put that next to my book on the history of the BPU.
Yeah, that one's
Can't
really
fall
There you
asleep.
go. There you go.
But it is a really good thing to be able to go as the mayor of Jamestown, as people start to ask, where are we at in terms of our current policies, to be able to say that we are much farther ahead than many other cities, and in fact much farther ahead than even the municipalities around us, which is a really great thing to do. So I think this, if nothing else, this reform initiative is going to at least show us that we are there, and that there is room for us to improve as a community, to start to look at some more of those policies. I do want to ask, though, to our police department, there was one of the key functions of this is stakeholder groups. So if you wouldn't mind just letting us know kind of what the next steps are, and do you have any recommendations for what types of stakeholder groups should be created as part of this initiative?
I think we should pick stakeholders from a diverse group. Businesses, city residents, different occupations, different races, everything. Diverse group of people, businesses, churches, and it's also outlined in one of the packets I passed around too for stakeholders.
So when they say stakeholder groups, do they mean, because I haven't really read this in depth, is this like a group of representative people, or is it just like anybody who's part of these groups, just come one, come all?
But usually you would preferably divide them up into a certain, like a church,
Sure.
a religious or faith-based group,
Okay,
law enforcement,
okay,
education,
okay.
anything like that.
So specifically, they ask for the involvement of local police force, members of the community with an emphasis in areas of high numbers of police and community interactions, not-for-profit and faith-based community groups, interaction with those that work in the district attorney's office, those that work in the public defender's office, and local elected officials. So as the Public Safety Committee, we're asking all of you all to help create these stakeholder groups that we can then start to engage and set a timeline for us to start to have those meetings with those groups. So I think it's best to just open up the conversation with, what types of groups should we be creating, right? Who should we be asking our police department to go and start to bring together, bring to the table, so that we can talk to?
Mr. Mayor, with that in mind, with that said, how does the newly Human Rights Commission line up with what you just said? What you said about businesses, how many people are business, churches. I mean, that just seems like, a great group to start with. Because it looks like everybody knows you have a cross section of people on that. So I don't know if that be a group that we would want to kind of tap into and make that one of their charges.
That is definitely one of the groups. I think we need to definitely have them as they are a cross section. I think we need to look at some additional groups of pockets of the community that they might not represent.
Sure.
One of the specific groups that the governor has requested is those that have been recently incarcerated, right? I know that I don't have any of those folks on our Human Rights Commission, but it is important that we engage those types of groups as well. So really opening it up to the Public Safety Committee to just start to brainstorm who should we start talking to start to put these groups together, to start to set up some meetings, to have discussions on what our policing should look like.
So, just for clarification, because church groups, is that, 10 people, 12 people, every church in Jamestown, different groups, different denominations, I mean, I guess what I don't know is when we have these stakeholder meetings, how many are there and how often you count them?
So this is up to you all as the Public Safety Committee.
That's a lot of meetings.
So to give you a better understanding of what the Department of Development does is they will hold 4 or 5 different meetings for different stakeholders. They'll solicit information. They'll try to get a better understanding. When we think of things like church groups and for our police force, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the sheriff is doing all Zoom. They're doing all Zoom meetings. The same thing we did with our HUD funding. They were Zoom meetings with stakeholder groups. You could bring them in as different mixes of people. You can bring them in as a section of not-for-profit groups, a section of faith groups, a section of whatever, or you just set several meetings and bring those groups in to talk about the issues that they're facing. We could do it either way. I think what we're doing is just looking for some guidance from you all as the Public Safety Committee, as the ones that are now the arbiters of the police reform, to help us figure out who do we need to just bring together.
Okay, the other question I had, there seem to be a lot of little pieces and parts to this reform initiative, and so I guess this is a question for the committee. They're talking about use of force and recruitment and and so do you do that for every constituency group? Like churches get to have their say in all of those policies, and businesses get to say and have all of those policies, and is that how it's supposed to go? Because it seems like there are a lot of pieces and parts, and so that could be 4 to 5 meetings over time for each stakeholder group, or 4 to 5 meetings getting through 2 of the 5 or 10, or so. I guess we're gonna put the structure and how long these meetings are, and do we have a general set of questions that we ask so all groups are being asked the same thing? It's a lot to think about. But I'm just thinking, say for example, church groups. So we talk to church groups about use of force policy, and then we talk to church groups about recruitment, and we talk to churches about, what that whole stack of what you had over there. Is that something you can do in 4 to 5 meetings with a church group, and then you do it again with business people, and you're doing it again with you're doing it all by April?
And I think anyone would want to know what will be my time commitment, how many meetings, and
Sure.
they want to come to a meeting and here's the agenda. Let's do this, this, and this. Keep it to an hour or whatever. And I think then people will get involved. If you say it's going to be meeting after meeting after meeting and just talking in circles, people will say, well, there's really nothing that's going to happen here. Let's have a set agenda. And I can see a variety of groups. I was thinking of people who work, we were talking about stakeholders again. I'm thinking of people who might work at the YMCA, who are young people, and maybe some teachers, maybe even put some young people on this, high school seniors even.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But again, I think a time commitment that you want to know, and how many meetings, and what is the goal? What exactly is the goal? What are the questions that we're going to answer?
Well, I'm looking at the suggested work plan, the governor's proposal here. We first set this planning course, which is what we're doing right now, have been doing. The next phase is listening and learning, and that looks like it maybe is a month and a half, 6 weeks, just looking at this timeline here. Then we have to draft initial proposals over a course of about another 6 weeks or so. And then we have to have more public comment on it after that for another about 6 weeks. And we need to revise and ratify that. That puts us into February of next year. And we must have this in place by the end of March next year. So we've kind of set the timeline.
does it kind of make sense, maybe it doesn't, all those groups that you just talked about, to separately have meetings, the first initial meeting with them, just to kind of like, introduction, this is what we're looking for, but then the rest of the meetings, have them all together, because we're, even though I might be, for the church, I'm sure, as a business owner, we still have the same common goals for the police department. And so just, maybe just having separate groups, meetings at first time, just to set, lay the groundwork down, this is what, this is what it is, this is what we're looking for, because that can be,
That's gonna be big. And then like
that's
your
a
idea
lot
of
of,
just
that's a
having-
lot of meetings, that's a lot of meetings, if you're gonna have, you're gonna have like 4 or 5 group meetings with the church, 4 or 5, it's just, why repeat, the same information, and, just, just, to me, I don't know, just that first initial meeting, just to, okay, for the church people, blah, 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 in the same message, but just with the different groups, and then, we're gonna get everybody together and lay out what I just laid out for the governor's thing.
An option is to, after you start meeting with these groups, is to pick maybe a couple leaders, and then when we, like you mentioned, bringing everybody together, just bring the leaders of each group together.
Yeah, and the groups can do that themselves.
Yeah.
We leave that up to the groups, saying, and,
Mhm.
we're looking like, I don't know, we need 4 or 5 people from the group who's willing to, do this.
I'd like that, and then they're consistently, we're hearing from the group that they're representing about make sure that, now that person, you can ask that person, what are some of the things you wanna make sure that
Exactly.
we bring to the discussion? Cause I don't wanna have like 11 meetings.
And encourage their representatives to, have meetings with their stakeholders, to, so that group becomes a liaison, and then they just keep going, keeping them in.
Yeah.
And so if there's, and then at the end, you can bring everybody back, I don't know if we're, have a space big enough, or we'll be on the other side of this thing, of Rona. And just to kind of to get some of that feedback that the governor's, looking for, before you put it in final ink and send it off.
Who gets to type all that? My kids would say.
It'll most likely be my staff, but that's okay. We'll get it squared away. The other thing I would just point out to this group that some communities have also started working towards preparing a survey for residents and citizens. If that is something you are all interested in, it captures a different portion of feedback for this process. So that is another potential option that we could do, is send out resident surveys.
City of Lockport has started an online survey using a Survey Monkey, and I looked it up the other day. I tried to print it out, but it was too many pages. If you click off of it, it was very light colored, so I couldn't print it off.
I did send our survey out today to you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, cause I think the sheriff said you guys came up with a survey as a
So
Okay.
you're free.
For the county?
It might be a nice thing to put like on the city website or Facebook page, so we, and it's running for like a 2-week period or something like that, so.
Right.
We just ask people to make sure that they're, fill out the survey, and then that might be just as
Right.
good as, instead of trying to identify all these people, I don't know who all these people might be that we would even approach.
So the survey is only one component. You still have to have the stakeholder groups.
Right.
Yeah, I know, but I think it's, so what is
Just
the survey?
confirm.
Just saying, just saying.
Survey, what are some of the questions that are asked in your survey, what page is it on? Which one is it in?
The stakeholder input consultation. Basically asks,
So do they,
All
did you
the
do it in like
questions in here.
Survey Monkey, or did you do it in like a Google Forms, or how did you create it?
I'm not sure, but it's
Okay,
automatically saved.
okay.
So I think this would be what the chief is referring to as the stakeholder input consultation. Would be questions that could be asked of the stakeholder groups, but also things that could be turned into a survey and then released to the residents if we wanted additional feedback. So there would be questions that we could ask stakeholder groups as part of it. some other municipalities are using similar questions, similar feedback tools.
So with the county survey, is that, each police department submitting,
Yes.
submitting questions?
When you
and everyone
open-
put it together?
Yep.
Oh.
When you open the survey, there'll be a scroll down box, and it'll ask you what department are you talking about.
Oh, okay.
It say Jamestown.
Oh, okay. But everybody's putting it together at once though, you all are doing it together.
So it sounds like we have to put together some stakeholder groups as well as a community survey. Are there any other types of feedback that you all want to get in order to help prepare the plan?
So when you talk about incarcerated, are you gonna be working with the probation officers, or are you gonna be, how are you going to identify, those people?
Well, if Councilmember James tells us to go work with probation, that's who we're gonna,
I'm not
we're gonna
public,
start
I'm
working.
not public safety, but, but.
I mean, I don't know, I mean, this is kind of big.
And I think we also ought to have victims of crimes included as a stakeholder group.
Exactly.
How's that finding these people? I mean, I guess that's why I was thinking the survey is like, would you be interested in being a stakeholder? And what, not like pick a box, but are you gonna represent clergy, do you wanna represent? I just don't know, I don't know enough people in Jamestown to know who falls into these buckets. And I don't even know the 9 of us, or those of us sitting here, we don't know people in Jamestown who fill these things. And so I almost kinda feel like how we need to find a way for people who wanna be a part of this process to let us, kinda like your Human Rights Commission, who wants to be a part of this process, and what constituency group would you be representative of, and then we have to cull it down, that's the hard part.
How did you recruit that commission? Like, what was the process there?
We had an open application process. We can always put out a similar request to all of the individuals that applied. That's completely fine if you would like us to do that, to try to identify additional individuals that might be interested in being part of the stakeholder groups.
That might not get some of the groups that we need.
Everybody receives a BPU bill. I mean, it seems like that's a good way to, besides that, and Penny Saver, I know a lot of people use, I don't know if they do it anymore, but I remember before, people read Penny Saver front to back, Post Journal,
Yeah, cause there are some people who aren't gonna do an online survey.
Right, but, if you have the information on, in your BPU bill, at least you know it's going to every household. Everybody receives I believe everybody will receive a utility bill that lives in Jamestown. That could just be a way to get some of the information out. If they read it or not, that's on them, but at least, that's just another mechanism.
The problem with that is that they only go out once a month, and we think we need to move on this much more quickly than that.
I understand.
Doing something online or putting something.
Well, I'm just saying, that's just one, cause I think we're gonna have to hit social media, we're gonna have to hit everything, laundromats, do you put it in liquor stores, do you, go where the people are at? Put it in do you put it in the hands, at the supermarket, I don't, you just gotta go where the people are at, restaurants, I don't know, radio, I think every media
All of
that's
the
out
above.
there, we have to go and word of mouth. Schools.
One potential option, there are many ways we could do this, again, we're looking to you all for guidance, is we could put out a resident survey similar to the city of Lockport. We could add a question on there if individuals are interested in being part of a stakeholder group and want to give themselves, for example, like an hour to talk with the committee about answering some of those additional questions. We could do that way as well. That is one of the potential options. The other potential options would be for you all just to say, set up however many stakeholder groups. Let's just start to get people from different components of the community involved in it, and we start to just run through that, and then also send out a survey to the community. That's another potential option.
Do you know how successful that survey was?
I think they just put it out, so I'm
Just
not
put it
sure.
out?
Yeah.
Just started it last week, I believe.
Just last week, okay.
I think we also have to consider the geography of the city too. We wanna get people from the 6 wards. You know, from each of the, I think representation from each of the wards would be, I guess I envision all these different groups and then having a leader of each group. And that might be 6 or 8 people sitting in a room like this, who, you know, I represent, whatever group, you know, I'm here representing what, like a youth group might be, you know, I thought of the people who work with, the kids at the YMCA, or Striders, something like that, you know, or maybe, like you said, people who've been victims of crimes, or people who have been incarcerated. But I think we talked about a lot done with the, you know, large, you know, 30, 50 people in a room. It's, you know, it's tough to get much accomplished with 100 people in a meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, breaking it up into smaller groups and having somebody who could be there, kind of lead the discussion and then record the information.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure the Renaissance Corporation has done some things like that. I think the Gimme Foundation has been involved in things over the years where they've had smaller groups like that. Done it up at the Jackson Center. So I think that's better than having one big mass meeting and trying to have a discussion where you can get people's opinions and information.
So is there a particular way you guys want us to go? Public Safety Committee? We're looking to you for guidance.
I'd say go with the survey monkey. I think that's something we
Okay.
running very quickly, just get the information back quickly. And then also, if you want to, look at the people who applied for the Human Rights Commission, especially the ones who didn't get appointed. Let's look at those people. See if you're interested in something like this. 'Cause I know there were other boxes on that application. You know, are you interested in doing this for the city, or doing that for the city? So
Mhm.
there's people there.
Okay.
I would agree that as long as it's a good cross-section of the city, I don't wanna basically duplicate the Human Rights Commission by choosing people that were not chosen for that group, and then we're just duplicating it over again. So I wanna make sure that there's a well-versed cross-section of the city. Also, I think this needs to be, these meetings, I think we have to have definitive structure to them, cause I could see very quickly where this could turn into bashing the police session. That's would not be constructive at all of what we're trying to establish here. That's why I think it's imperative that this is these meetings with stakeholders are structured.
I agree, and I think that's what would be good to have the initial meeting with each stakeholder, because people are gonna, they're just gonna, you know, purge. You know, so get your purge out, and let's move on, and let's do something, you know. And so then when we all come together, we can all, you know, be really good and, you know, hope that you're done with it. So let's move on, because we're not gonna, once you spit it out, and let's just go. But I don't think, you know, I just think it's gonna happen, you know. And you see the community people, you know, they have feelings and you tell it and spit it out, and we got work to do. We got work to do, so get it out of your system, and let's go.
So just to recap, we will work to put together a resident and citizen survey. We'll add a proponent to indicate if individuals would be interested in following up with a stakeholder meeting, most likely over Zoom, and to see if they're interested in providing some more additional feedback to this group that we can then use to put together for a draft of the police reform initiative. Is that what I'm hearing from folks? Okay. So I'll have my office work with the police department staff to try to craft a survey. We'll get a draft out to the Public Safety Committee and the council members for any additional feedback, and then we will push it out. We'll also try to rely on the council members to push it out to your constituents as well. We'll find different ways to send it out, whether that's via mail or whether that's online. Most likely encouraging people to visit a link on the city's website to respond quickly.
And I think it's important to think about some other outreach things, because some people just are not going to fill out a survey. And those are the ones that you're going to want to be having at the table. So, you know, I don't know how you get that group to, you know, I don't know, do you send it to the probation office, everything, and then as the people are coming for their visit, do you make them fill it out then? You know, I just don't know, because I mean, look at the census, you know, people just don't fill things out.
Look at the number of people that show up to vote.
You know,
Locally.
you know what I'm saying? When it's not a presidential election, look at the school board who elected. You know, people just don't do it, and so I think we have to use everything that we have. You know, is it something? No, I don't. Is it, you know, the Facebook? I don't know. Is it the website? Is it? I don't know. I just don't think we have to cover everything that we can think of, because, and then people still, you know, people well, my vote don't count. Well, I'm gonna fill out that survey. You know, so I mean, you put a lot of energy into surveys, and we've all done surveys, and I mean, you even think about it yourself when you see a survey. You know, so I just think we gotta think about our tools and be a little more creative and safe. You know, because you know, I wouldn't want anybody to be going door to door or you know, things like that. So, but I just think we just gotta come out of the box and trying to think of how we get as many people as possible involved besides the survey.
So do we have a timeline for when you all would like the survey and the stakeholder group meetings to have occurred by, so that we can get feedback?
Say we could use the timeline based on what the governor, if we follow that timeline, then obviously we'll.
I would say we're already a little bit behind schedule. What you want.
If you decide to use the survey I sent you, that's gonna cut off a lot of time on your part.
It's already made.
Because it's already made, and it also asks on there, would you like to be a part of a stakeholder group, and if so, which one?
For the stakeholder consultation, the survey.
Yes, those are some of the questions.
Other questions.
Is this something that the police department as a whole, you guys kind of just said, these are some of the questions?
The
How do you
local-
like these questions?
The questions, I believe, are from the governor's order, some of those.
Okay. So if we were to go with these questions, how soon would that, could we get the survey get it on survey monkey again? But what is the public safety committee, are you decide to these, say, yeah, let's use these, and give up to the council, and Brent said that we're behind already?
I think we're slightly behind at this point. A couple of weeks anyway.
So if I could make a recommendation, so to do the survey as well as the Zoom meetings for the stakeholder groups, maybe we can look at November as a time frame to have all of that completed. There is a city council meeting on November 16th, if you all want to do just an update, or we could look at December, but the last council meeting in November is the 30th, that's a voting session. Before that, the work session is the 16th. If you'd like, we could try to set that as a day to have the survey completed and then conduct the stakeholder group meetings.
Yeah, I think we should shoot for mid-November to start those stakeholder meetings.
Okay.
I don't think we should go any later than that.
Okay. So then, if that's the case, then we would be looking at a draft of any type of reform resolution for a December timeframe to then allow for any type of public comment, and then voting would be most likely February for the council.
Sounds about, it's gotta be done by March.
April.
Before April 1st.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the March voting session will be our last
Sorry.
opportunity.
And if we send something that comes back from the governor's office. it's
Correct.
not gonna
Yep.
correct anything.
So that's a good time.
Does that sound okay for folks?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll go ahead and put that together. We'll follow up with the survey information for the city council and for the members of the public. The documents we looked at today, we'll go ahead and we'll put those online on the city's website. All right.
Yeah, I think some of the questions are very good. It's a good starting point.
Any way to put that on your Facebook page too, and?
Sure thing. Yep. I'll once we share it to the website, which may take a day or two to for us to get up on there. We're in the midst of finalizing the budget, so give my staff at least a couple minutes to breathe. They're working late tonight too, so. But we will put that up there, and I will share that out on our social media sites. Anything else?
Should we plan to have a meeting of this group? After the survey goes out, or before the survey goes out?
How long will the survey be out there too? How long are you gonna, complete it?
I would say maybe 2 weeks, I don't know.
Yeah, we're probably looking at about 2 weeks for a survey.
So why don't we plan a meeting after the survey is completed?
Sure thing. That's great.
We could look at the questions, by email, approve those before it goes out.
Okay.